Hello, everyone, and welcome back to CFS Summit 2022, Render the Phygital Reality. My name is Enrique Menendez, Editor-in-Chief at CFS, and your host for this year's summit. Today is Day 3 Science, the method for retail evolution, and we're pleased to have all of you with us in VR at the Grand Palais Ephemer in the Spin Metaverse. Our topic for this panel is Catalyze Action and Progress with Circularity. Our speakers are Carla Susani, founder of Fondazione Susani, Alessandro Canepa, project coordinator at Trick, Elena Falestini, senior manager, brand partnerships at ISCO, Lauren Bartley, sustainability and CSR director at Gani, and Bia Valdez, editor-in-chief at Vogue Philippines. So today's conversation is going to be closing out our multi-day summit. Over the past several days, we've covered quite a bit of ground. First, we established a foundation for understanding how to measure the value of Web3 as it intersects with fashion, culture, and science, hearing from top investors in the space. Then, in line with this year's theme of how to render the phygital reality, we drove into dissecting the applications and use of phygital NFTs, whether in fashion, in art, or architecture. We also heard from top world builders in the industry on how to create metaverse spaces, balancing fantasy with function. On the topic of fashion and identity, we got a little bit existential and tried to understand what it means to be human, and more than that, what it means to be a digital human in the age of Web3. We also looked at fashion's role as a tastemaker, trendsetter, and reflection of culture, and how this plays out in a world that looks very different than it did 10 years ago. And today, on our last day, we've placed even more emphasis on science as a method for fashion and culture to evolve and reflect the demands of society. As CFS stands for Circular Fashion System, our goal is really to develop a discourse that's tied to action and to imagine and implement circularity in fashion and culture. In our Mind the Planet with Web3 Circular Retail panel, we heard about technology and innovation that leaders in the industry are implementing at the retail level. And a common theme throughout this year's discourse was how to balance personal and individual innovation and willingness to adapt with the challenges that come with changing corporate systems. So for our closing panel, we really want to leave off with a closed focus on the word circularity. Looking at some and hearing from some of the leaders in this space so we can understand how to create frameworks for organizations that foster growth. And this will lead us into our first question, which is going to be for all of our panelists. And so with this question, please feel free to introduce yourself and to share about your work in addition to answering the following. With the word circularity, we have a danger of using this sort of as a catch-all. And the same way that sustainability has sort of perhaps developed into as well. So for our understanding, we would love to hear from you on how you understand circularity, particularly as it applies to your own work. And perhaps we can start with Lauren.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Lauren Bartley, so I'm the Sustainability Director at Gani. I've been with the company for just over 4 years. I am mainly responsible for our sustainability strategy across both social and environmental, and now also materials and innovation. And yeah, I think when it comes to circularity, I agree. I think it does run the risk of just becoming a little bit like the word sustainability, which is a bit of a buzzword. For us, we don't necessarily publicly talk about circularity as the concept, but we more talk about what it means for us within that. So when it comes to circularity, we have 3 pillars. So the first one would be designing for circularity. So how do we make sure that our design teams are trained and informed how to design a product at the beginning of its life that will inform the way it's treated throughout its life or towards the end? The second pillar is circular business models. So how do we start implementing more circular business models so we're not so reliant on the linear model that we have now? So for us, that would be repairs, resale, and also rental. And then the third area when it comes to circularity is more about recycling. So how do we make sure that the products at the end of their life are being cycled back into a system, with the ultimate goal for us being fiber to fiber recycling. So if we can one day make sure that old GANI products become new products, that would be, yeah, a very big goal for us that would have been achieved. And very pleased to say that we have a few pilots in the works already. So it's a step in the right direction.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. My name is Elena Faleschini. I'm working for ISCO as Senior Manager of Brand Partnerships. I've been with ISCO for almost 6 years. I was previously taking care of field marketing, and now I'm working on projects that have to do with brand partnerships, focused specifically on circularity and sustainability, which is a key priority area for us today. So yeah, indeed, circularity is a word that is sort of, let's say, at risk, just like sustainability was a risky word to be used in the past. We actually like to and prefer to talk about responsibility rather than sustainability, because there's a lot of confusion around the use of the word. So we need to put boundaries around it. For us as ISCO, when we talk about circularity, we mean aiming towards a closed loop system in fashion where zero first generation materials are used. This means that we like to harvest materials in a completely different way, which is also why we like to consider ourselves as a denim scientist, let's say. And in this way, we no longer think about cotton fields as our material source. Instead, we adopt principles from nature, renewing and regenerating first generation materials to create second generation of value. So this is the way we like to see circularity.
Thank you for the question. First, I introduce myself. I am Alessandro Canepa. I work for Piacenza Cashmere. Piacenza is one of the oldest fabric producers in the world. It was founded in 1733 and still owned by the Piacenza family. And just 3 weeks ago, Piacenza has purchased the Cerruti wool mill, which is one of the very, very old traditional wool mills here in the Biella region, so that to enlarge its group. We are focused mainly on the production of fashion and luxury fabrics for the all large fashion groups such as Louis Vuitton, Kering, Dior, Hermes, especially in the women's market. So to go as regards the TRIC project, I am the coordinator, and the TRIC project is a project focused on the traceability of the data related with the circularity and sustainability by blockchains. The aim is to fight against the greenwashing and the counterfeiting of this data in order to declare sustainable practices when they are not put in place. And I think that this will be one of the major plus for companies like us focused in Europe and which are carrying out the old sustainability practices in this moment and are object of unfair competition of companies pretending to carry out these practices, but in reality not doing that. So going to the specific questions. So the word circularity should be specifically linked with the measures of the circularity. And the measures of the circularity should be based first on the traceability of the value chain, starting from the raw materials and then to spinning, weaving, finishing, dyeing, and clothing production. Without the traceability, even the circularity is not possible to be measured, and it is absolutely important and critical to provide the real traceability of the flow so that you can measure the differences between circular practices and practices which are not circular. So on the side of how it applies to our own work, so our effort is to start thinking and designing the fabrics from their early stages in order to define which can be the circularity practices. This is not an easy job, an easy task, because the experiences are not so many, and there are different, we have many different passages in the value chain, so that we have to think about the selection of the raw materials, then the right spinning and weaving processes, as well as the dyeing and the finishing, in order to provide fabrics and clothing which at the end can be recycled. We have already started to carry out this job and to trace the job even by the tech platform, in order to demonstrate that we are effectively doing this job in our company and in general in our value chain, from the receipt of the raw material to the delivery of the fabrics.
I'm Bea Valdez, and I am the editor-in-chief of Vogue Philippines. And prior to that, I was a designer actually that specialized in craft and the work of the hands. And so slow design, manufacturing, and sort of processes that are very mindful have always been integrally important to me. So in terms of circularity, I think that the fashion system has been on a linear system for so long. And what that is, it is really take, make, and then waste. And when we think of circularity, it's really sort of bending that into a circle. So simply put, you do that by using the 3 pillars. The first would be to design out waste and pollution. The second would be to try and create products and material in play for longer. And the third is regenerating natural systems. So I think in our work in the platform of Vogue, what we try and do is really shine a light on designers, emerging designers, established designers, local designers, and internationals who are really trying to find their own way on this path, because we feel that the more we shine a spotlight on them, the more we can see the way forward for the future.
Well, I've been working in fashion since '68. So I've seen a lot, I have to say. I'm very privileged. I've seen all the, when the ready-to-wear was born, when the couture kind of died, when all the luxury ready-to-wear became important, and the fast fashion came, and all this, which has been a very interesting journey. And in all that, for many, many years, nobody really questioned what was going to happen to all those clothes. It was like, was very strange, like nobody thought about it. I remember for a while, people were burning the clothes, and of course, nobody was thinking that could be very dangerous for the planet. And even today, I think the biggest of the problem for me about circularity is where are, which is the end of all those products? Where are they going? Because this is what makes the big difference. So in my opinion, the way I see it is I think we should encourage all the young generation to reuse the clothes, and to make new clothes with what was already existing, so they give a real second life to clothes. And circularity can be really done, of course, buying the vintage, wearing, encouraging. But I think basically we have to know how to use all the leftovers, because it's huge. It must be enormous, I don't know, beyond our imaginations. And so I think it would be very important to grow young designers that really work in that way. And I think they can be very creative anyway. I know a few brands that they really now work in this way, and they create new products from old products. And I think this is really, the point for the future. Not for all the brands, of course, impossible, but encourage that. I think.
Thank you so much. I think that's really, it's so inspiring to hear. And staying with you for this next question as well, Carla. I really, the way that you've established, I've seen decades and decades of fashion, and I've seen this change, and I've watched this, this shift, and sort of here I am embracing this new thing. I think, as we all know, that's not a mindset that everyone is able to always tap into. So I think my next question is for you, sort of, personally, how do you approach, I guess, setting goals or a way of thinking for yourself to be open, to these new solutions and these new ways to think and rethink fashion?
The way I think or the way I act? The way...
That's...
It's a different...
Both.
Yeah, okay. No, I think, it's like what I want to do is kind of what I'm doing. It's kind of a place where people can gather, bring their old clothes, exchange, swap. Maybe it's an ideal world, maybe not even money is needed. It's just, you can keep exchanging. In fashion, if you think Paul Poiret started recycling at the beginning of the century. Martin Margiela was a master of recycling, and they were both genius in the fashion world. So I think everybody should do a little bit. That's the way I think. And maybe ideally, if I could see a new ideal world, I think in every collection of each designer, there should be a section about here's my recycled collection from my own old collection. And this is what I made today, new from my own work of the past. I think that would be very beautiful, actually, and very interesting.
That is really beautiful, especially as fashion is so reliant on references.
Yeah,
so it's
you
almost
go
kind
to a
of
showroom and say, this is my room of recycle, my own creativity recycle for my own. I work for my work.
Well, first of all, education needs to be top of mind. And when we talk about education, it's not about only personal education, so how we teach ourselves around sustainability and circularity, but it's also about educating others in our corporate lives, but also educating brands. And this is something that as ISCO, we've placed a lot of focus on. So when we speak to our brands, when we speak to our clients and retailers, we like to educate them in a way that they also aspire to reach a sustainable way of designing their products, for example. And secondly, when it's also linked to education, it's actually about creating new business models that basically profit from sustainability. So this requires not only knowledge, but it also requires investments, especially in technology, that bring even more value to second generation materials. So these new business models must be in harmony with our ethical and environmental values, and they must benefit from every level of the value chain.
I think the way sustainability can enter into lives is actually in so many ways. I think the thing about sustainability is really shifting it into this mindset that it's an ecosystem. So there are so many different points of the supply chain that we can actually find ourselves and participate in. And again, like I said, it's a mindset shift. It is this thinking that changes it from the concept of ownership into stewardship. So it's always thinking about how things are made, why we are making them, who makes them, are they ethically made? And I think just choosing small things every day, being more mindful about your choices, it's not very intimidating when you sort of break it down into these little pieces.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And so moving now to open to the rest of the panel as well, we've heard from sort of a personal approach when we're working on the corporate level with working with your respective companies. How do you approach creating, building a framework and setting goals for achieving progress with circularity? And let's start with Lauren for that question.
Yes, for sure. So yeah, at GANI, we have currently 44 goals to reach by 2023. And I'm very pleased to say that we have basically finished, which is very nice. So since the summer of last year, we've been working towards a new strategy, which will take us up until 2025. But I think in terms of approach and a framework, the goals that we have set is very much aligned with the culture and the values of the company. And sustainability and the value and the values and culture of the company cannot be so disconnected. It really needs to make sense for the brand. So we have founders that are very personally passionate about the climate crisis. So we have very ambitious goals towards climate action. And then the same with other areas like circularity, also materials and innovation, and then social impact, especially within the supply chain. So it really has just made sense for GANI to focus on these areas, which then means it's much easier to implement goals and get everybody on board on the journey. And it has been a journey that we've been on since 2013. So yeah, we know that a lot of people working within the company now are very passionate about also achieving these goals alongside, you know, working within the fashion industry and doing what they love in their respective areas. But yeah, so that really helps a lot.
This activity involves all the functions of the company. As regards design and the production, we have already started this job, and it is important also to involve all the subjects in the decision making and the implementation processes to be aware of what they are requested to do, and also to be aware of the challenge, because this is a novelty, especially for companies like us, which have to provide a very rapid service with a high quality to our customers. So this is the first step of the process. The second step is to implement the process progressively to all the functions of the company, and involving also the other additional functions, such as the services. Services means the energy, and we have installed solar panels just last year to be 100% based on renewable energy in I think 1 or 2 years. We are already at 80%, around 80%. And then also the other, such as the use of the water, the reuse of the water in production after the first iteration of its use, and so on. So as you can understand, this is a cultural process which should involve all the people working in the value chain, not only within our company, but also our suppliers.
Well, the first thing that is necessary, we believe, is shifting the mindset, because reaching the sustainable and circular goals that have been set requires a completely different mindset. So we need to aim towards a more open and shared information system, which basically means more transparency across the supply chain. And in this way, when we have a new business model, like I was talking about before, but also a different mindset, this also facilitates the creation of partnerships along the system and across the supply chain, both vertical and horizontal. So in these kinds of partnerships, we need to make sure that there's clear and also shared objectives that are set, and that of course includes also a timeline. So for us, partnerships are very important, and this is something that I can also go in a little bit more in depth afterwards. But of course, when we talk about these kind of partnerships across supply chain, what we also need to consider in parallel is the framework that has been set by policies. So for example, the EU policies, so UN Sustainable Development Goals, so the SDGs, but also third-party accreditations and authorities. And all these accreditations and these authorities, they supply basically the system with a common language and common targets. And it's very important that we all look at these as references, and that we work in that same direction to make sure that we have clear set goals and that we work towards the same objectives. So in this way, we facilitate conversations, we facilitate also sharing information as well. But of course, at the same time, it's very important to also maintain and respect the integrity of the brands and the companies that we are referring to.
Our issue is actually, it's very, very young. We've just launched our 4th issue. So I think in terms of framework, this is something that we're still building as well. But I do know that when we did launch, I think we had 40 stories, 12 of which touched on sustainability or circularity, craft or heritage. So these things were intentional, but they weren't difficult to do because these were also the stories that we felt were most relevant. So I think within each issue, we always have these stories that touch on sustainability on our own terms. We, on a personal level, as an editor, I do have a checklist that we go through to make sure that our stories are inclusive, that they're diverse, that they have different perspectives, that they always, when they can, be related to sustainability. And this might be a beauty story about hometown remedies or things that are locally grown. So again, there's so many avenues for us to be able to help the industry have a bigger perspective on what sustainability means in the Philippines.
Thank you. And it's such a great group of panelists, and everyone's, respective companies and organizations are really, working on projects that I think are inspiring in this space. And, going to Carla and Fondazione Sozani, you just created an amazing project pop-up together with Spin by Labloco and NABA, working with Franca Sozani's Fashion Archive to sell these vintage clothing as not just physical items, but phygital items. So there's the physical and the digital garment. Could you talk to us a bit about, this project and maybe how it came about, or what the inspiration for it, was to step into this space?
Well, actually, was not my idea, but when he proposed to me, I saw, Lorenzo, I think it was such a new approach. Something for me, at least for me, it was super new. And the fact to be able to trace the clothes, the fact that you can have a label on your clothes, that when they go from one person to another person, the life of the dress and the journey that dress had. I think it's super inspiring, but also it gives a value. It gives a value to the garment for the future. It's not just buying a vintage piece and wearing and then throw it away or to give as a present to somebody else, but it's more giving a continuous life for the future. And I think, we tried with Franca's clothes. For example, there is a coat by Miu Miu that I particularly love because it's blue like her eyes. And you can really see the fashion show, and then you can see Franca wearing, and then you can see, all the different passage. And hopefully the person who's going to buy is going to put, her own personal details, and that coat will be travel in the future.
Thank you. And that blue coat, I actually spent quite a lot of time playing with the augmented reality version of it. Yeah, and it's I think the other thing about that project that I found amazing was the way that Spin's model works, where if the digital twin is sold in the future, a percentage of that goes back to the original creator, which in this case was to Fondazione Sozani, which is the money is raising for genome research, right? So in this way, the circularity is actually coming back into supporting this cause in perpetuity, which is amazing. And to see how that ties into the history and the legacy of the clothes, it's just like this beautiful, beautiful, mix to see.
Yeah, they're going forward. Let's keep going.
Yeah. And moving now to Lauren, I think we've already heard, a bit on this panel about honesty and how important honesty is to approaching this work. And I really have to say, in my work, I've looked very closely at the way that companies communicate CSR. And I think a lot of companies are scared to say that there is a problem, or that fashion inherently does not mix with sustainability. And when I was looking at the Gani report, that was the first thing I saw. And I just thought it was so refreshing, because if we're not able to say that, how are we then supposed to make, have any progress? So maybe you can talk a little bit about the annual responsibility report, and also even the use of this word responsibility as the focus for Gani.
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, we don't call it a sustainability report. It's a responsibility report, because we as a brand don't know if we'll ever be sustainable, whatever it means these days, but we do know that we can act responsibly. And everything that we've built up around the work on responsibility is to become the most responsible version of ourselves across multiple areas, both social, environmental, and innovation. And I think the approach for the report when we started building it a few years ago was, when you typically look at sustainability reports, they are quite boring. They are very technical. They're not very inspiring. And for us, it doesn't really align with GANI and who we are. And so we wanted to create a report that was interesting to read, informative, but also like very transparent. So transparent on the progress that we're making towards the 44 goals, or where in some cases where we're not making progress and the reasons why, because it's holding ourselves accountable by putting that out there publicly. But at the same time, it's also educating people on the issues within the fashion industry and hopefully helping raise the awareness level with consumers. And so, yeah, I think when you even look down to like the language that we use in the report, it's not very technical, it's not very scientific. It's as if you were talking to a friend. And that's also very intentional because we want to try and humanize the conversation around sustainability and not have it be something that is very technical or can be very intimidating for people. We're really trying to break it down and just be very transparent on what it is we're trying to achieve and the reasons why.
Thank you. And I think that starts to lead into a little bit about how, these efforts are communicated. And with that, I think comes understanding how, I always find the word consumer to be harsh, but consumers or users or shoppers or fashion lovers are, responding. And Elena, ISCO works to establish partnerships both vertically and horizontally across the supply chain. Can you share to us about your process for developing these partnerships and how it's vital to building ecosystems for circularity?
Yeah, so as I was saying, partnerships are key for us to move towards a more circular and a more sustainable ecosystem in fashion. And we've been putting a lot, as ISCO, we've been putting a lot of focus on the different partnerships. I was mentioning before vertical and horizontal partnerships, because the partnerships need to be not only within the supply chain and within the value chain, but also with external partners that can be out of the box, like, for example, research centers or universities, and getting knowledge also from other industries to be able to improve. So if these ecosystems are to be built, there's a few fundamentals that first of all need to be met. And I can name 4 of them. So the first is transparency, second, harmonization, third, education, and fourth, again, partnerships. So transparency, we mean by transparency of information and also sharing information with external partners. And this also may mean, for example, sometimes even accepting that we may make mistakes and that we need to improve and move forward. But it's about learning from each other's mistakes, but also transparencies in the different practices that are being met. Harmonization means harmonization in terms of language in the first place, because still today, when we talk about sustainability, there are a lot of different terminologies that are used, different kinds of standards that are talked about, and it's quite difficult to reach as a global goal, but harmonizing both the languages and the different accreditations is very important. Third is education. And I keep on stressing this point because it's quite important. It goes together, of course, with transparency as well, but educating the brands that we work with and educating also the future designers, and working also with the younger talents as well to teach them how to reach sustainable development and garments is very important. And last but not least, partnerships, again, with clear objectives.
And Elena, what are some examples of case studies or industry partners that you work with, and how this helps your mission to build circular models?
Yeah, so when I was talking about vertical and horizontal partnerships, basically it's also internal, and you can see it from internal and external partnerships to the supply chain. Examples of external partners can be, for example, universities and research labs. So we've put in place a partnership with MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. A few years ago, we also worked with an institute in Sweden called More and Rise, and with whom we study basically sustainable practices. But on the other hand, of course, the easier, let's say, partnerships refer to those that are with the brands and retailers that we currently work with, so internal to our supply chain. Just an example I can give you is a recent partnership we've done with a US-based brand called Madewell. We had a three-way partnership with them, together with the Bluesign Technologies as well. Bluesign is an organization that supplies solutions for sustainable textile production. So basically, we created a common set of goals that met Bluesign's very strict standards. Were technically feasible also from an R&D perspective, because as ISCO, of course, we want to maintain the quality and durability of our materials. So when we talk about sustainability and circularity, and in the first place, durability and quality remain priority. But also, last but not least, met the integrity of Madewell's brand, from also a brand positioning perspective. So as a result of the partnership, Madewell was the first brand in the US to launch a Bluesign approved denim garment. So this is a good example of a recent partnership we've done, which was successful.
Okay, Bia, media is such a vital part of building an ecosystem and supporting ecosystems that have been built. Where do you think media's responsibility lies today in reporting around circularity? And how can we assure transparency and honesty in this space?
Yeah, it's a very relevant question. I think with us, it's two ways about it, how we've been doing it in the magazine in these last 4 issues. The first is that we focus on small designers and basically the personal steps they've been trying to do to achieve a more sustainable practice. And not just the steps. I think what's really important for us is the motivation. And I find that a lot of these designers and manufacturers and makers, they're really motivated by helping the next person. So that might mean the farmers that do the pineapples and they have pineapple fiber waste. And this has then been spun into a yarn that then is created for sneakers. And this is a story we had on Lakat Sustainables, or also this lady called Anna Lagon, who owns a company called Bio and the Bio Foundation. And she's really sort of spearheaded circularity in the Philippines in her own practice. She has this wonderful story called The Journey to Zero. And when I speak with her, sometimes she might be off in a farm checking the quality of soil and prepping it for the months that are coming so that they are able to plant better quality cotton. And then after that, she will be with another advocacy that she has that twines these things together. And then another advocacy which does hand looming for the textiles. And if she has waste from her own factory, she will bring it there and make zero waste fabric. And then from there, it goes onto the cutting floor, goes into garments. She has been open to collaborating with different designers as well. And the last I heard, she was building a factory that deals specifically with end of life of fabrics. So again, I think what is amazing is whether they're bigger companies or individual designers, they really have this personal motivation, which as much as you look at the environmental impact, I find that a lot of the people in the Philippines are really motivated about helping the next person and looking, how they're connected to them. And I think that's important for us as a media company to show that behind these big concepts, it's really rooted in people.
So continuing on with case studies of circularity initiatives, Alessandro, Trick is developing a textile clothing pilot. Can you walk us through, as simply as possible, what the circular model looks like here and the positive impact and potential that it has?
So, Trick for First is a data collection platform aimed at collecting the data to demonstrate not only circularity, but the preferential certification of origin. So all the passages of the production. And this is also aimed to provide to custom agencies the demonstration of the process, because these public bodies are in charge to carry out the inspections as regards to the traceability, and then obviously to fight against the greenwashing. But also the product environmental footprint, which is an absolutely important key performance enabler to understand the weight of this process, as well as the assessment as regards the use of chemicals and the ethical assessment for the protection of the worker. So the platform is aimed to collect all this data to verify by certified public bodies that these data are true, and then after this certification to save them in blockchain so that they cannot be changed in a later moment of the process. This is aimed to fight the usual trick, and this is the name of the project, to assign lots at the end of the sustainable lots at the end of the production to those goods which are object of inspection, but without putting into real practice the sustainability. And this is a typical counterfeiting of the data as regards green practices. And so the aim of Trick is to carry out this job so that you cannot anymore produce goods with an unfair competition with those companies like us who are carrying out the job.
Alessandro, you also work with IoT. What are some of the ways IoT intersects with fashion?
So IoT is a key enabling technology, and it is absolutely mandatory to implement IoT. I make you an example. Let's consider the product environmental footprint. So to calculate the PEF, you have to collect the data related with the energy, but also the resources, as well as water and gas, everything which is involved into the production of a specific lot. And we have to provide the estimation of the PEF per each specific lot and not for the whole production. So what is needed to do, and we are starting to implement, is to put sensors on all the machineries to measure all the parameters necessary to calculate the PEF. And on the second side, to put the data collected by machineries into relationship with the single lot of production so that we can provide for that specific lot the data to measure the PEF. And then at the end to save them in blockchain by Trick. So only by this way, and therefore only by the implementation of IoT, you can have not only an estimation, but a real calculation of the real data related with the production and the measure of its sustainability.
Maybe going now to Carla, obviously with these spaces from Cosorcomo to Fondazione, and now doing these new initiatives, and maybe, even with this recent, pop-up where there was the physical experience where people were able to go and see the garments and play with, the digital versions of the items. How do you feel that perhaps the market, maybe specifically the market that you speak to, is responding to initiatives around circularity? And do you think they want more of it, or are we still learning and discovering?
Well, I think both. There are people who really are discovering, and this is, it's everybody's interest anyway. There are people who don't even know what it is, because we meet so many different kind of people. But they are very informed, very, very informed customers, actually, that they really care. And this, I have to say, mainly they're very, very young people. All this started very strongly before COVID. you know, when the youngest people started to look for quality projects or for things that had a meaning, had a content, not just buying clothes, and became much, much stronger probably after those 1.5, 2 years of thinking. And to look for something that has a meaning has become super important. Even for older customers that we have, you know, the spoiled women with furs, they are now asking for something that has a content and a quality and a reason why it's there. They want to know more where they were made. They're very interested in the artisan, in the craftsmanship. If you can tell a story about a dress, you know, saying this inside was hand finished or was handmade, you know, this attracts people very, very much today. It's an attention to craftsmanship, which is very strong. It's
right.
awesome.
And so, yeah, that's storytelling is so integral to fashion. And what I'm hearing is that this is basically another layer and a way to add to that storytelling in a way that's transparent and has a lot of weight. So it's really great to hear. Now moving to Alessandro. Trick provides stakeholders of the supply chains and final consumers with all the relevant data needed to implement end of waste practices and be aware of purchasing choices. Where do you think consumers currently are in terms of their expectation of transparency when it comes to making purchase decisions?
So the first expectation, in my opinion, of consumer is to be provided of this data, because currently they are not provided, and also for those companies who are providing them, they are not provided by a standardized way to measure them, so that consumer receive different statements which are not so easy to understand on their side because they are measured by different KPIs. So the standardization of the KPI is the first step after providing the data. On the second side, it is necessary that these statements are certified. Otherwise, you can state anything you want, but it's not sure that you have really introduced these practices in your production. So finally, it's important also to provide an explanation of the impact of these KPIs. So what does it mean to produce a certain quantity of CO2 or of water, and with simple examples so that they can understand which is the real impact of their purchases. At present, this is a great fight, and I think that the policy of the European Commission to provide the digital product passport in the incoming years is the first step to answer these needs of the consumers.
And moving to Lauren, I would also, love to hear. Gani is a young brand in such a, way it holds this energy, just so inherently. How do you approach, like the marketing and communication of the CSR efforts, and how do you find more that this aligns with your consumer, and how do they respond to it and interact with it as a brand?
Yeah, I think we have a couple of different formats in the way that we communicate the work on responsibility. And as I mentioned, like the report is very much like a deep dive into progress that we're making. And then we also now have a dedicated Instagram account called Gani Lab, which we essentially post 3 times a week. And it's more about the progress again that we're making, but in real time. Or it could also be, putting things out there saying, hey, 60% of the polyester we use is now recycled, or this is like a really good milestone, but hang on, we also don't think that recycled polyester is the most perfect solution out there. So we're also looking into all of these innovations. So on one part, it's like celebrating successes that we're having, but also acknowledging that, this is a continuous journey and we're probably never going to reach a final destination or have one silver bullet solution. For trying to get the industry to be more responsible and ourselves again more responsible. And then feeds out onto like the main channels. We also talk about responsibility there, and every time we put messages out there on responsibility, they are very positively received. I think we also do have a young audience that is very naturally engaged, but we also get critical questions too, and it's really amazing to go in and look at the comments and see that actually what it is that people are asking and what information are they hungry for, and then how can we adapt and make sure that we provide that to them.
Thank you. And now moving to Bia, when it comes to creating media and content for your readers, what do you think they are craving in terms of this reporting, and how are they responding to it?
It's been really, really interesting because, as I said, when we launched, you sort of have sort of like your fingers crossed, right? And it's interesting always to see what the public will respond to. And our stories on sustainability have been consistently at the top in terms of interest and readership. So people are really genuinely interested in the products, in the processes, and in people behind these stories. So I think that is extremely encouraging. And I think another thing is that we proposition it as a dialogue. Never as I think something that's really didactic. We give people, I think, options through the lens of fashion, through the lens of circularity, and through the lens of sustainability. In our launch issue, I know we had a fashion editorial that was called Greener with Pink. And this was done specifically with pieces that were either rented from resale. We had reworked vintage pieces, and then of course that one big sort of great investment piece. So I know there was an old top from Celine that had gotten damaged. And so we brought it to one of the fashion director actually owned it, and she brought it to a designer who did this amazing beadwork on it just to give it a second life. And the fashion team also had rented a very historical garment from 1957, which we included in this editorial as well. So again, I think it's the opportunity to give people different modes of consumption that is really vital and I think really exciting. And just so that people understand how they can participate in this whole new way of thinking.
And so now moving to our final question, and this is also the final question of the entire summit. The decision to embrace circularity, which is maybe perhaps a bit of a funny question. Everyone's here, they've showed up, so in some sense a decision has been made, ready to embrace circularity. But I think the question is, when we find ourselves in a situation, whether it's speaking to a peer, or at a board meeting, or speaking to someone else in a corporation, sometimes we continue to meet resistance, openness, willingness to take the necessary steps to change and find more progress in meeting circularity. So I think the question is, when we're faced with that person or that conversation, what is sort of the maybe elevator pitch, or what do we say to try to communicate from our sides why it's so important? And maybe starting with Lauren.
It's a very good ending question. No, but I think it's really necessary too. What I would say is it's very hard to change people's perceptions or opinions if they don't have the mindset to do this in the beginning. But the secondly, maybe a more practical piece of advice I can give is to shed light on how we approach it at GANI, which is everything that we do basically on sustainability is a pilot project to test and learn, because if we don't have a proof of concept, then it's going to be very difficult to change the status quo. So whether that be piloting, rental, resale, repairs, a fabric innovation, you name it, everything starts as a pilot project so we can test, learn, fail, take all the learnings, and then hopefully try and adopt and scale it faster. And that for us has then proved to be quite successful in our work and managed to, in the end, ultimately speed up the progress that we're making on sustainability much faster. Yeah, I think that would be my one piece of advice.
Thank you. And moving to Carla.
Well, I think, we need to talk a new language to people now. It's like the people want to hear something different from what they have learned so far. So I think to explain, not being a brand has different goals. It's to explain how to collect, archive, keep, take care, swap with your friends, and think in a different way and give different values to your way of living is what, in our case, we can transfer and explain. I think collecting, archiving, it's of course one of my passions, but I think it's important to give a value. To buy thinking you're buying something which has a value, a content. Something will have another life. It's not going to disappear when you put it in the washing machine. I think it's very important. This is what all the brands should give, a value.
Well, while it may be true that there's still a bit of a resistance to sustainable and circular practices in some organizations, it's also true that with recent times, especially in the past year, most companies have started their journey towards circularity in one way or another. We've seen that the brands that we work with, the retailers, they have all started, wanting more information. They are being more demanding. So that's, a very positive sign. The industry does feel the need to find solutions quickly, or else they'll be out of the game very soon. And this is not only because of the requirements that are set by the policies that we also mentioned before, but also because the consumers are also becoming more educated and more demanding as well, consequently. So these different changes in the environment and the consumer's mindset will sort of force the brands to do it. And the ones that will not adapt quickly, that will not be flexible toward this will, as I was saying, be out of the game. So they need to be more educated, they need to be more transparent, and they need to all, work together in the supply chain, just like we're doing as manufacturers in the first place.
And now also moving to Alessandro for this final question.
So there are different levels of answer to this question. The first is that it is very simple and not linked with ethical reasons. It is that these statements will become mandatory. So, for example, as regards traceability, the customs all over the world are already experimenting the blockchain traced data in order to demonstrate the traceability of the goods. To give you some figures, around 59% on the statement of the WTO, so the World Trade Organization of 2022, 59% of the customs are thinking to adopt this technology in the next 3 years. So this is something which cannot be avoided, and it is mandatory. But beyond the problem, and the DPP also on the side of European Commission will become mandatory in a few years. So they should be prepared to the fact that they have not a choice, and they have to prepare now to collect the necessary data. On the second side, there is an ethical involvement, and this is more important in the long run. As you know, the change of the culture is not so easy, and it takes a long time, but to measure traceability and sustainability is important to put the people in the condition to understand themselves the impact of their actions. I make an example. To leave a machine warm and working in this moment, it happens in the companies, and it consumes gas and energy, but the people is not aware of the impact of their actions. And the first aim is to involve them into this measuring and to provide them information as regards the concrete consequences of their actions, so that they can understand what to do by their own actions, and to be more involved on the ethical side, because there is a direct link between their actions and what is to be done every day and every moment in the production.
I think obviously when you're head of a huge corporation, to be able to shift that conglomerate or that company, it seems so daunting. I think I always think of it as to answer the question of how do you eat an elephant, right? You eat it one bite at a time. So I think, again, circularity can be broken down into the supply chain, and then you might find the insertion point, which is simplest for the company, and just really begin there. I think even if you take one step at a time, as long as you take that step, it's a good place to start. So again, it might not be a total systems overhaul at once, but one step at a time, I think is doable. The other thing that I would say is the consumer, the clients, they're looking for this. It is such a different way of people looking for the things they want to invest in. They want to know the story behind it. They want to know how things are made, who makes it, and why they are made. And I think these are not just objects, but they're solutions to everyday thinking. So I think now is really the time to listen, because the world is changing, and we're changing hopefully in a more mindful and intentional way. And I guess the last thing I would say is maybe sometimes you have to make a personal choice, right? I think there's that saying that we don't inherit the earth and our natural resources from our ancestors. We borrow them from our children. And I think just with that mindset, you sort of have to question and think, what would I leave to the people that matter the most? So I think in a way, maybe also, if you're open to thinking about it that way, it might help us all make the kinds of choices that will be better for everyone in the end.
That wraps our panel. Thank you, everyone, for joining this conversation, Catalyze Action and Progress with Circularity. I really feel like we heard a lot of honesty today, and the system that we're working in, again, is a big one, and it's not, these changes I think that we're trying to make aren't easy, and everyone knows that. So just seeing people show up here, and take the time and just shifting that energy slowly, I think it's really what we're trying to build at CFS, and just working with these like-minded thinkers and humans in the industry. And so thank you so much to our speakers, Carla, Alessandro, Elena, Lauren, and Bia, for taking on these questions. And we'd also like to thank our media partner, Vogue Philippines, our CF Hub partner, Caring, our retail partner, Gallery Lafayette, and community partners, Amex and Meta. And we really look forward to keeping this conversation alive beyond the summit through the year and through the years to come. You can also visit our newly launched CFS page at cfs.fashion for news, insights, and analysis on embracing circularity, technology, and its intersection with fashion. And thank you so much, everyone.